I didn't put that there.
Emma Crawford had been leaving anonymous love letters in random books for 3 months, never expecting anyone to write back. But when she opened Pride and Prejudice to find a response tucked between pages 212 and 213, her heart stopped. Someone had discovered her secret, and worse yet, they were writing back in handwriting that looked hauntingly familiar. Before we explore Emma's mysterious literary romance and the shocking discovery that awaits her, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. Your support helps us continue bringing you captivating romantic stories. Now, let's return to the Riverside Public Library, where love letters and secrets are about to collide in ways Emma never imagined. Emma Crawford had always believed that libraries were the most romantic places on earth, though she had never admitted this to anyone. At 28, she had been the head librarian at Riverside Public Library for 4 years, and she spent her days surrounded by thousands of love stories, yet had never experienced one of her own that lasted longer than a few awkward coffee dates. The old Carnegie Library building stood majestically on Main Street, its limestone facade and arched windows giving it the appearance of a cathedral dedicated to knowledge. Inside, the high ceilings and tall stacks created intimate alcoves where readers could lose themselves completely. Emma knew every corner, every hiding spot, every perfect reading nook in the building. It was her deep love for the library and her romantic nature that had led to her unusual hobby. 3 months ago, on a particularly lonely Friday evening, Emma had written her first anonymous love letter. Nothing too personal or revealing, just a few lines about how beautiful she found the autumn light streaming through the library windows and how she wondered if anyone else noticed these small, magical moments. She had slipped the letter into a random book on the fiction shelf, choosing The Time Traveler's Wife because it seemed appropriately romantic. Emma had never expected anyone to find it, and certainly never imagined that someone might respond. But they had. The first response appeared 2 weeks later, tucked into the same copy of The Time Traveler's Wife that Emma checked regularly. The handwriting was elegant but distinctly masculine, and the words were thoughtful and kind. The unknown correspondent thanked her for the original letter and shared his own observation about how the library felt different in the early morning hours, before the world woke up, when it seemed to hold all of human knowledge in peaceful silence. Emma had been thrilled and terrified in equal measure. She had written back immediately, this time choosing Jane Eyre as their meeting place between the pages. Her second letter was bolder, describing how she sometimes stayed late just to experience the library in different lights and moods, and asking if he was someone who understood that books could be portals to other worlds. Their correspondence had continued for months, with letters appearing in various classic novels throughout the building. They had discussed everything from favorite authors to childhood memories, from philosophical questions about love to silly observations about the quirky patrons who visited the library. Emma found herself falling in love with this mysterious person's mind and heart, even though she had no idea who he might be. The letters had become the highlight of Emma's days. She would rush to check their designated meeting spots each morning, her heart racing with anticipation. When she found a new letter, she would carry it to her private office and read it multiple times, analyzing every word and phrase for clues about her correspondent's identity. But it was the letter she found in Pride and Prejudice that changed everything. Emma had been working late on a Thursday evening, updating the catalog system and enjoying the peaceful quiet of the empty library. She had decided to check their usual spots for any new correspondence before leaving for the night. Most of the designated books contained nothing new, but when she opened Pride and Prejudice to page 212, her hands began to shake. The letter was longer than usual, and as Emma read, she realized that her anonymous correspondent had begun to suspect her identity. He wrote about noticing someone who seemed to check the same books repeatedly, someone who moved through the library with the familiarity of long association. He described watching this person from afar, admiring their dedication to the library and the gentle way they helped patrons find exactly what they needed. The letter went on to describe specific incidents that only someone who worked in the library regularly could have witnessed. Emma's mysterious correspondent had seen her stay late to help a struggling student with research, had noticed her personal collection of poetry books on her desk, had observed her habit of humming softly while she shelved returns. But it was the final paragraph that made Emma's world tilt on its axis. The letter writer mentioned that he thought she might be the person who had helped him find books about grief counseling 6 months ago when he was struggling with a difficult loss. He described how kind and understanding she had been, how she had quietly set aside additional resources without making him ask for help. Emma remembered that interaction vividly because it had been with James Sullivan, the pediatrician who ran the free clinic downtown. She had noticed him coming to the library regularly, always looking slightly lost and overwhelmed. When he had finally approached her for help finding books about coping with loss, she had seen the pain in his dark eyes and had made it her mission to find every resource that might help him heal. The realization that James Sullivan was her anonymous correspondent sent Emma into a state of complete emotional chaos. She had harbored a quiet crush on the handsome doctor for months, admiring him from afar as he sat reading in the corner alcove near the medical journals. He was always impeccably dressed despite his demanding schedule, with dark hair that seemed perpetually tousled and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Emma had fantasized about striking up conversations with James, but she had always found excuses to avoid it. He seemed so serious and important, while she felt like just a small-town librarian with an overactive imagination. The idea that he might be interested in someone like her had seemed impossible. But now, holding his letter in her trembling hands, Emma realized that James had been falling in love with her through their correspondence, just as she had been falling in love with him. The man she admired from afar was the same person who had been sharing his deepest thoughts and feelings with her for months. Emma spent the entire weekend in a state of nervous excitement, trying to decide how to respond to James's letter. Part of her wanted to reveal her identity immediately and end the mystery, while another part of her was terrified that the reality of who she was might disappoint him. In their letters, she felt witty and interesting and worthy of love. In person, she worried that she was just ordinary. She finally decided to write one more anonymous letter, testing whether James was truly ready to discover her identity. Emma crafted her response carefully, admitting that she was indeed the librarian he had described, and that she remembered their interactions about the grief counseling books. She wrote about how much their correspondence had meant to her, and how she had come to care deeply for the person behind the letters. Emma ended the letter with the proposition: if James wanted to meet his anonymous correspondent, he should come to the library the following Friday evening at closing time and wait in the poetry section. She would reveal herself then, if he truly wanted to know who she was. The week that followed was the longest of Emma's life. She went through her daily routines mechanically, helping patrons and organizing books, while her mind raced with possibilities and fears. She found herself paying closer attention to James during his regular visits, noting how he seemed more distracted than usual, how his eyes would search the library as if looking for someone. On Wednesday, Emma discovered James's response in Wuthering Heights. His letter was brief but heartfelt, accepting her invitation for Friday evening. He wrote that he had been hoping to discover her identity for weeks, and that knowing she was the kind librarian who had helped him made perfect sense. He admitted that he had been developing feelings for her even before he suspected she might be his correspondent. Friday evening arrived with agonizing slowness. Emma had changed her outfit 3 times, finally settling on a soft blue dress that brought out her eyes and made her feel confident. She had arranged her auburn hair carefully, leaving it loose around her shoulders instead of in her usual practical bun. As closing time approached, Emma's hands shook as she helped the last few patrons and locked the front door. The library felt different in the evening light, more intimate and expectant. She made her way to the poetry section, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it could be heard throughout the building. James was already there, standing near the Keats collection with his back to her. He had clearly taken care with his appearance as well, wearing a dark sweater that emphasized his broad shoulders and dress pants that made him look both professional and approachable. When he heard her footsteps on the hardwood floor, he turned around slowly. The moment their eyes met, Emma felt the world shift around her. James's expression moved through surprise, recognition, and finally a smile so warm and genuine that it took her breath away. He had known, she realized, or at least strongly suspected, that she was his mystery correspondent. James walked toward her slowly, as if approaching something precious and fragile. When he reached her, he stopped just close enough that Emma could smell his cologne, something subtle and woodsy that made her want to step even closer. He told her that he had hoped it would be her, that during their months of correspondence, he had found himself watching her work and wondering if the thoughtful, romantic person behind the letters could be the same woman who ran the library with such quiet competence and kindness. Emma admitted that she had been terrified he would be disappointed when he learned her identity, that she had worried their written connection might not translate to real life. James reassured her that everything he had come to love about his anonymous correspondent was clearly visible in who she was as a person. They talked for hours that evening, sitting among the poetry books as the library grew dark around them. James explained that he had started visiting the library regularly after his father's death 6 months earlier, seeking solace in books when grief counseling sessions weren't enough. He had been drawn to the peaceful atmosphere and Emma's gentle presence, though he had been too consumed by his own pain to consider approaching her romantically. When Emma had helped him find resources for dealing with loss, James had begun to notice her more carefully. He saw how she remembered the preferences of regular patrons, how she went out of her way to help students with research projects, how she treated every person who entered the library with genuine respect and interest. Emma shared her own story, explaining how she had always been something of a romantic dreamer, someone who believed in the power of words and stories to connect people across any distance. She told James about her childhood spent reading in libraries, about her dream of creating a space where people could find both the books they needed and the books they didn't know they were looking for. As they talked, Emma realized that their months of correspondence had given them a foundation that most couples took years to build. They knew each other's thoughts on dozens of subjects, had shared their fears and hopes and dreams through written words. The physical attraction that sparked between them in person was layered over a deep emotional intimacy they had already established. When James finally walked Emma to her car that night, he asked if she would have dinner with him the following evening, not as anonymous correspondents, but as themselves, building on what they had discovered together. Their first official date was at a small Italian restaurant downtown, where they continued conversations that felt like extensions of their letters. James told Emma about his work at the free clinic, about his passion for helping children who couldn't afford proper medical care, Emma shared her vision for expanding the library's community programs, particularly literacy initiatives for adults. Over the following weeks, James and Emma fell into a comfortable rhythm of dating. They discovered that their written compatibility translated beautifully into real life, though their physical attraction added a dimension that letters couldn't capture. James was an attentive and thoughtful boyfriend, remembering details from their correspondence and building on the emotional intimacy they had already established. Emma found herself opening up in ways she had never experienced before. With James, she felt free to share her most ambitious dreams and her deepest insecurities. He listened with the same thoughtful attention he brought to his medical practice, making her feel heard and valued in ways that were entirely new to her. Their relationship deepened quickly, built on the foundation of months of emotional sharing. James began spending evenings at the library, ostensibly reading medical journals, but really just enjoying Emma's presence as she worked. Emma started visiting the clinic during her lunch breaks, bringing coffee and books she thought he might enjoy. The town began to notice their relationship, and Emma discovered that she enjoyed the gentle attention. Several longtime library patrons mentioned how happy she seemed, and Emma realized that she had been walking around with a smile she couldn't suppress. But it was James's colleague, Dr. Martinez, who made Emma understand just how significant their relationship was. She pulled Emma aside at a community event to mention that James seemed like a completely different person since they had started dating. Where he had been withdrawn and melancholy after his father's death, he was now engaged and optimistic, clearly energized by his new relationship. 3 months into their official courtship, James surprised Emma with a romantic gesture that took her back to the beginning of their correspondence. She arrived at work one Monday morning to find love letters hidden throughout the library, tucked into books in every section, from fiction to science. Each letter contained memories from their anonymous correspondence, quotes from favorite authors they had discussed, and new declarations of love written in James's familiar handwriting. The final letter was in the poetry section, where they had first revealed themselves to each other, and it contains an invitation to dinner at James's house that Friday evening. Emma spent the week discovering new letters as she went about her daily work, each one making her fall more deeply in love with the man who understood her so completely. James had clearly spent significant time and thought on the project, choosing books and locations that held meaning for both of them. Friday evening arrived with Emma nervous and excited in equal measure. James had been mysterious about his plans, asking only that she come hungry and ready for surprises. When she arrived at his house, a charming Victorian cottage near the hospital, Emma found the front path lined with paper lanterns and the porch decorated with flowering plants. Inside, James had transformed his living room into a private library, with books displayed on every surface and candles providing soft lighting. He had prepared Emma's favorite meal, having paid attention to comments she had made during their many dinner conversations. Over dessert, James presented Emma with a leather-bound journal, explaining that he wanted to give her something that honored their written beginning while looking toward their future. He suggested they continue writing to each other, even while living in the same town, as a way of preserving the intimacy that letters had given them. Emma was touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift, recognizing that James understood how much their correspondence had meant to her. She realized that he was offering her a way to keep the romance of their anonymous letters alive within their real-world relationship. As autumn turned to winter, James and Emma's relationship continued to deepen. They established traditions like Sunday morning breakfast at the library, where James would read medical journals while Emma planned programs and events. They took turns choosing books to read together, discussing them over long walks and cozy evenings at home. Emma discovered that James was just as romantic in person as he had been in his letters, perhaps more so. He brought her flowers from his garden, left sweet notes in her purse, and planned thoughtful dates that showed how well he understood her interests and dreams. The library thrived under Emma's increasingly confident leadership, and she realized that her happiness with James was making her more creative and ambitious in her professional life. She launched a series of author readings in book clubs that drew visitors from neighboring towns, and she began planning a major expansion of the children's programs. James, meanwhile, seemed to have found new energy for his medical practice. He told Emma that loving her had reminded him of the joy possible in life, helping him emerge fully from the grief that had shadowed him after his father's death. By spring, Emma knew that she wanted to spend her life with James. Their relationship had grown from mysterious correspondence to deep friendship to passionate love, and she couldn't imagine a future without him in it. The proposal came, appropriately, through a letter. Emma arrived at work one morning in May to find a familiar envelope tucked into Pride and Prejudice, the same book where she had first realized James's identity. Inside was a letter written in his careful handwriting, beginning with the words that had started their entire correspondence. James wrote about how their anonymous letters had saved him from a period of profound loneliness and grief, how Emma's words had reminded him that connection and love were still possible even after loss. He described their relationship as the greatest love story he had ever been part of, better than any novel because it was real and theirs. The letter ended with a proposal, asking Emma to marry him and continue writing their love story together for the rest of their lives. James mentioned that he was waiting in the poetry section with a ring, hoping for her answer. Emma ran through the library, her heart racing with joy and excitement. She found James exactly where she expected, standing among the Keats and Dickinson volumes with a small velvet box in his hands and an expression of nervous hope on his face. Her answer was immediate and enthusiastic, though she could barely speak through her tears of happiness. James slipped the ring, a vintage piece that perfectly matched Emma's classic style, onto her finger as they stood surrounded by the books that had brought them together. They married 6 months later in the library's main reading room, surrounded by family, friends, and hundreds of books that had witnessed their entire courtship. Emma wore her grandmother's wedding dress, altered to fit her perfectly, and carried a bouquet of roses and baby's breath that matched the flowers James had been leaving in random books since their engagement. The ceremony was small and intimate, officiated by the town's retired mayor, who had known both Emma and James since childhood. Their vows included promises to keep writing letters to each other, to always make time for books and quiet conversations, and to build a love story worthy of the greatest romance novels. At the reception, held in the library's community room, several guests mentioned that they had suspected James and Emma were perfect for each other long before the couple themselves had figured it out. Mrs. Patterson, Emma's predecessor as head librarian, confided that she had been hoping for years that Emma would find someone who appreciated her romantic heart and sharp mind. James' mother, who had flown in from California, told Emma that she hadn't seen her son so genuinely happy since before his father's illness. She thanked Emma for bringing joy back into James' life and for showing him that love could bloom again after loss. As their first year of marriage unfolded, Emma and James settled into a life that felt like the best kind of love story, one built on friendship, sustained by passion, and enriched by shared dreams. They bought a house near both the library and the clinic, with a large garden where James could grow flowers and vegetables, and a home office where Emma could work on library projects. They continued their tradition of writing letters to each other, though now they left them in books around their own home rather than the public library. Emma found James's notes tucked into her professional development books, while James discovered her letters in his medical journals and novels. The library flourished under Emma's leadership, becoming known throughout the region for its innovative programming and welcoming atmosphere. Emma often thought about how her anonymous letters had not only brought her the love of her life, but had also given her the confidence to pursue her professional dreams with new boldness. James expanded his practice to include a second clinic in a neighboring town, driven by the same desire to serve his community that had first attracted Emma to him. Their shared commitment to helping others became one of the strongest bonds in their marriage. On their first wedding anniversary, Emma and James returned to the poetry section of the library where they had first revealed themselves to each other. James had convinced the current evening staff to let them have a few minutes alone after closing, recreating the circumstances of that pivotal Friday night. Standing among the same books where they had first admitted their feelings, Emma reflected on how a simple romantic impulse had led to the greatest love of her life. She had started writing anonymous letters because she believed in the power of words to create connection, never imagining that her mystery correspondent would turn out to be the man she had been admiring from afar. James pulled out a letter he had written for their anniversary, reading it aloud as Emma listened with tears in her eyes. He described their marriage as the continuation of a story that had started with anonymous hope and had grown into a love more real and lasting than either of them had dared to imagine. They made love that night surrounded by the books that had brought them together, their own love story now part of the library's history. Emma fell asleep in James's arms, thinking about all the other romance novels on the surrounding shelves, grateful that her own love story had turned out to be more beautiful than any fiction. In the years that followed, Emma and James became one of those couples that others looked to as an example of lasting love. They faced challenges together, supported each other's dreams, and never stopped writing letters that expressed feelings too deep for everyday conversation. Their story became part of Riverside's local folklore, the tale of the librarian and the doctor who fell in love through anonymous letters hidden in books. Young couples would sometimes visit the library, hoping to recreate the magic, though Emma always told them that the real magic was in being brave enough to reach out to another person, whether through letters or words or simple acts of kindness. Emma Crawford Sullivan had discovered that the most romantic place on earth wasn't just the library itself, but anywhere two people chose to build a love story together, one honest word at a time. And in the end, that was a story worthy of any great romance novel, except that it was theirs, and it was real, and it would continue being written for the rest of their lives.